All right. Welcome, everyone, for that Aspire session. I'm very happy and also a bit proud, to be honest, to have Thomas here. Thomas is CEO at Github. Maybe the marketing or sales people don't know Github. That's a shame, to be honest. But Github is a huge platform where actually developers host their source code, where companies run their deployment processes, their CI/CD, whatever that means, right? We have you here today for roughly 1 hour. We will talk about different things in terms of bit personal stuff, bit obviously future and GitHub related, and a couple of life lessons learned. So I'm very curious to that. Maybe before we start in that part, let me try to introduce you a bit. So when I reached out to you, I did in German, because maybe what people don't know, Thomas is a Berliner. So we could also have that whole session in German. So he grew up in Marzahn, and sometimes people say, no, I grew up in Hohenschönhausen, but it's a similar environment.
For me, it's all the same.
Yeah, exactly. For you, it's all the same.
Plattenbau.
Exactly. So these 11 floors buildings, when after growing up there, I mean, you made your degree in the school, right? Did your computer engineering, graduate at TU Berlin, so Technical University, PhD in mechanical engineering afterwards. And then you went into Ruby or Ruby development, right? So this is at least what I understood. You did like one of the first insurance company software things that what I read was distributed with floppy disks. Who of you know what a floppy disk is still? Okay, a couple of old, that's nice. Okay, so they were sent around, right? And then insurance companies actually.
I like how you're making the bad jokes, so leave the good jokes for me, yeah.
We come to your point later. That's not a problem. So let me quickly round it up, right? We actually sold or built Hockey app, so like a software testing app, sold that to Microsoft, joined Microsoft for quite some while in the DevOps space, Azure space, and then, as we just discussed, became part of that GitHub deal, the acquisition in when was it, 2018 something.
Yep.
And now leading GitHub as a CEO. So welcome. People on the stream will not hear that, but thanks for being with us. Now, I talked a lot already. The first question that I had when I started to prepare for that session here is, I looked up your GitHub profile. And I saw 2025, what was it? 548 contributions. So you're writing code or contributing. Maybe it's not code, maybe it's readmes. I don't know exactly. I had two questions when I saw it, right? Okay, you're running a multi-billion company, and you still do GitHub contributions. How do you do this? And what the hell are you doing there? Can you share something?
Yeah, it's two things. One is, we're running GitHub on GitHub. And so as such, the company is organized on our own platform. That means obviously our engineers and product managers are using GitHub every single day. That means me as CEO, when I see a bug somewhere, I find an issue, which gets me, a little bit light green square on my profile. But also all the other functions in the company, the leadership team, HR, legal, sales, everything is organized in GitHub. Our company communication is on a GitHub page. And so every time I need to announce something to the company, we create a pull request against the repository that is published on what we call the Hub. It's an internal page for Hubbers, which is what we all call our employees, to read how we work, our mission, values, all these things are published through GitHub on GitHub. So that's one way I get green contribution squares. And then I have, a bunch of hobby projects, both open source and not open source. And the not open source is mostly because I'm embarrassed about the source code and want to show all of you how bad some of my code is. And so when I find, a couple of minutes on a weekend or on a late night, and I'm in the mood of coding something, I do.
Nice.
And then I do demos on stage as well. So that also helps. But yeah, I mean, look, the GitHub has always been about, using our own platform so we understand how others are using it. GitHub has grown a lot through open source in the early days, and then has brought that concept of open source development, of millions of developers around the world working together, remote before there was really a remote first a wave of companies, and bring that also into the enterprise. And so it behooves us, to use our own platform every single day to know how others are using it as well.
But you're not doing any, I mean, you said bug fixes. You're not touching production systems?
I do not touch GitHub production code. Yeah, that's other than maybe a typo in our documentation and things like that. Although now with coding agents, I may actually get to that point.
Yeah, let's talk about it in a second. One first question that I would have is, I mean, we have you sitting here, right? You were at We Are Developers conference yesterday.
Yeah.
You're flying around the world, and at least I ask myself, what does an average day or week look like in such a role?
I think it's not that different than most of you here. I wake up in the morning and then I grab my phone while I'm still in bed and go through all my messages. At GitHub, that means a lot of stuff happens in Slack. So I open Slack and try to navigate, all the DMs and channels. And then I'm brushing my teeth and I frantically mark stuff unread again so I can find these DMs later, especially with a thread of 4 different people. And then you have to remember what's the combination of people that you were chatting with. At Microsoft, there's a huge number of emails, especially when we're here in Germany. It means you're waking up to whatever happened on the West Coast in the evening. I go through, customer escalations and those kind of things. And then depending on what time zone you're in, either the meeting day starts. So that's classically when you're on the West Coast at 8 or so, we head into team or Zoom calls or in-person meetings when we have people together. Here in Germany, it's nice because usually the mornings are quiet after you've gone through all the email and stuff, right? Then you have quiet time to do focus work or do fireside chats and whatnot. And then as the day progresses, then the West Coast wakes up and then the meeting day starts here. So it's a mix of, async communication, meetings, reading documents, giving presentations, talking with customers.
Yeah. Okay, sounds very similar, to be honest. And I think that Slack...
And then coding if I can,
obviously,
if I find the time,
Yeah, but the Slack part, it's really something, finding the right conversation, horrible. You're operating the platform, right? So you most likely get also a lot of insights on what people are doing with GitHub.
Yeah.
Is there any super surprising insights where you say, all right, people use it in a way I never expected people to use that platform? Is there anything that you can share that you have seen how people use it?
After 7 years at GitHub, I'd say I've seen everything.
Yeah.
So maybe I no longer have these surprising moments, but certainly over this journey, and I've been on GitHub as a user myself since 2009. So I joined about a year in.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the surprises we had over this period of time was how much it is used for non-coding scenarios. For example, citizens using that to share information with each other during the pandemic, or local governments to share their minutes, their meeting minutes, the decisions that they made, and they're leveraging the same benefits as software developers do, which is it's all in the open, right? Like ultimately the minutes of your local government's meeting is very similar to a README file. And then you can also see all the changes they made to those decisions, right? Because that then also is a pull request and you can see the diff. And if you think about it, some of you may have gone through some form of due diligence and you get red lines from a lawyer, which is like the 16th version of a document. And they just keep appending something to the file name. That's like Stone Age, right? Like we have a way better way of doing this, which is a pull request and version control. And so whether it's legal terms, whether it's company policies, those things are actually better managed in a Git repository than in a Word file. So I think that's one scenario that is surprising. I think the other one, no longer surprising, but was how GitHub changed the world, is that many companies internally want to operate like an open source project, right? Like many large companies have the problem that teams are siloed, they live in walled gardens, they don't collaborate. And then they look into the open source scene, and all of a sudden the same developers that in the company work within their own ownership structure in open source, they're willing to contribute with other projects. And so GitHub, for a long time, the value prop it brought into these companies was like, let's take the way of how open source projects work together, right? Where all the things that matter are your username and the code you're contributing, right? Like you don't know your title, you're not looking up an organizational chart or the education history or anything like that doesn't matter in open source. And bringing that into the corporation and having effectively all the parts of the corporation sharing, contributing, reusing components, that is really important to many companies today that produce software.
Very, very interesting. Thanks for sharing. I would have not expected that governments, for example, contribute there, and also the transformational part. Super interesting to hear. You touched upon a topic that's maybe the next step in that conversation about when you can also touch production systems in the future again with the help of agents. I think the way broader or rather abstract question is if you think about the future of software engineering, right? So what is your or GitHub's bet on that? So what do you foresee there? And I think it's very hard to predict like 5 years or something. So maybe let's make it rather a bit short term. I mean, you have a long-term bet, happy to hear that as well, right?
Yeah.
But if you think what influences us now and what will come, what is your take?
Our bet for the last 5 years has been on generative AI, on Copilot, on large language models, helping developers write code faster. Many developers, after they use Copilot for the very first time, when it was still only autocompletion, said it makes them more fulfilled. It removes a lot of the strain of doing repetitive work over and over again. Who here in the startup ecosystem loves writing unit tests and refactoring and upgrading components, because all you have in mind is the innovation that you want to deliver to your customers, or finding that for customer and customer market fit. And it makes them ultimately happier. And I think that's really what our bet is, that we can use AI to both move faster with higher velocity for our customers, whether it's startup or the enterprise, and for ourselves, right? Like at the end of the day, GitHub and Microsoft, we are producing software for software developers. And as such, we are living through the same experiences and pain that you all do. Like our backlogs are endless. I joined GitHub 7 years ago, and part of the due diligence was to look through a lot of GitHub issues and wikis and README files and learn what's the customer feedback. And now here we are in 2025, and I can tell you we still have issues open from 2016 with feedback from customers of a feature that they want. For example, on the enterprise admin side, and then there's 100 sellers or so that plus one, my customer also needs that, or here's the number of German company logos, and we still haven't gotten to it. And that's not because we don't believe that feature is important, but because there's also 1,000 other things that are important, 1,000 other priorities, fundamentals, technical debt, European regulations, all these accessibility, all these things we have to go through. And so the bet is that you can take AI and get through that backlog faster, while also AI adds more to the backlog, right? That's the paradox that we're living in, that on the one side, we got faster through the help of Copilot and now coding agents, but also we added AI to the stack. You mentioned, before we started the stream, that you became a full stack engineer on Internet Explorer, whatever that meant, in the early 2000s. And today, full stack engineer no longer is, database and infrastructure containers and Ruby on Rails middleware, and then React on the front end. It also is AI models and AI evaluations, guardrails, responsible AI, upgrading the model to a new version and realizing that the new version of the model behaves differently than the old version of the model. So what you perceive as an upgrade actually is, for some scenarios, for some non-deterministic scenarios, a downgrade. And if we look forward into the next, I'd say year or two is probably the most realistic time frame I can give, because the longer you go forward, the more wrong you are about predicting the future. It's going to be a world of agents. We're going to be surrounded by software engineering agents, SRE agents, those that are monitoring our cloud environments. triage agents that look for a backlog, brainstorming agents, travel agents. It's not only in the software engineering discipline that we will have these agents, but we have them everything surrounding what a knowledge worker, in German, a Sachbearbeiter touches, right? And I think that's then the question, how do I become the conductor of these agents? How do I know when to use an agent and when to do it myself? Because look, if you know exactly which 3 lines of code you have to change to fix the bug, it's ridiculous to then figure out what's the prompt I need to write to let it do the thing that I know how to do, right? Like you're going to, unless you're making that, a game in itself where you want to motivate your team to say, find the right prompt for that outcome, it's going to be a question of, do I use an agent and that's faster, or just do it myself? And then how do I verify the output of that agent? How do I review all that code? And if you believe in a future where agents can write 10 times more code, that means also you have to review 10 times more code. You have to solve 10 times more merge conflicts. You have to review security vulnerabilities that agents may have introduced, because these things are equally imperfect as humans are. They're going to make mistakes. Humans do that too. And so you have to have processes around that.
Would you say that, you could actually say for code reviews, merge conflicts, all of that stuff, you could use other agents as well, right? Helping.
And you will,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. But what does it make to the role of the software engineer today, right? So, we're all writing code with the help of AI already, right? So code creation, and yes, it's way more code, as you mentioned. But will I, as the classical software engineer, not only coding, but also system design, etc., disappear in the future? Or what is your assumption how that role will change? Is more like orchestration, keeping the overview, making sure we are building like a current system and overall application. So how do you see that developing?
If you look into jobs, and whether it's software engineering or other engineering disciplines or architecture and whatnot, the coding part or the writing part or the designing part, those are just a tool within the toolbox of an engineer, right? Like here in Germany, we're very proud of our engineering culture and our long history since the medieval ages or whatever of engineering things. Yeah. And engineering, the last stage of that process is the actual implementation where I'm actually coding something. But when you woke up this morning and you had an idea, a feature that you wanted to build, it wasn't the first step to, you didn't have that idea in your head in code. You had it in either German or English or whatever language is actually, the inner voice in your brain. And then the part of the engineering job is actually to figure out, how do I take this idea described, or even worse, by the way, is when the product manager has the idea and you have to figure out what they actually mean versus what you had in your head, right? Because that's also, if we're honest to ourselves, a big part of the job is to figure out what is it actually that is described in the idea versus what can I in reality implement. And then you take that idea and so you convert it into requirements or some form of that. You compare that to your existing architecture, your existing code base, because the majority of projects, even in a startup incubator like this, means modifying existing code, not starting new projects, right? Like my joke that I've made way too many times in the last few years is that the happiest day of an engineer is when they do file project new, and from there it's all downhill, right? Because on that moment you have all these new open source libraries you want to use, the new frameworks, the new design patterns. Yeah. You have all this, it's so great to start a new project, and then it's 3 weeks later and you realize all the mistakes you made, all the wrong decisions you took. Yeah, maybe that library isn't as scalable, or the deployment process is shit, and things like that. And so then you're in the mode of every other engineers, which is fixing the mistakes of your predecessor or of your previous self. Most engineers I know, when they look at the code that they wrote 12 months ago, they're like, oh my God, I need to rebuild all of this because I know so much more now than I knew 6 months ago. So I think this is, when you think about engineering, this is the actual part of the job, which is like taking an idea and converting that into reality within the framework, within the architecture, within the project that you already have, and then align with your business model. It's not like the iPhone app has the same software architecture as the large-scale system, that has to serve, hundreds of thousands of customers in Berlin. Or maybe it's not only for Berlin, maybe it's for, every city around the world. And all of a sudden, you also have to keep in account, connection times and latency and local regulations and different languages, right? Designing software similar to designing, houses or cities is a complex process with, hundreds of thousands of decisions. And if you ever, build a house or renovated a house, you know that there's like 10,000 different water taps, 10,000 different windows, 10,000 different kitchen colors, right? And then making the decisions for these that is actually the job of the engineer. And then, yeah, at the end, it's also converting that into code, and AI will help us with that. But as I said earlier, you have to review all that code. Most companies that have a certain size and scale and customer base do not push into the main branch. They do not merge from one branch through a pull request without having somebody else in the company review this code, because they want to have established that level of trust. And now if the agent writes the code, we actually require 2 engineers review that code, the one that assigned the task to the agent, but that one obviously is biased. And then another person to make sure you don't have bias from the engineer or even something like an insider attack.
Yeah. In that setup that's described, how do you look at vibe coding, right? I mean, we see like Lovable and Replicate all these platforms where we can pick any person from that room, right? They can build their own application. No one reviews that code. It's maybe just going public, right? So what's your perspective on that? Is that then also part of the future, or is it something?
It's part of, well, first of all, I think it's great. I think vibe coding is great because it actually brings something that we have always done into this new world of AI, and it gave it a cooler name. We used to call this just hacking it, right? Like,
true.
And if those that are engineers in the room, if you think about the early days when you learned coding, that was some form of vibe coding. You read a how-to or book or magazine or found a YouTube video. Script kiddie. But like it is some form of vibe coding where you're hacking it together and you have the first time, the Hello World application or little game running on your machine. Most kids in many ways are vibe coding today because they don't care about a DevOps process or DevSecOps, modern engineering practices. All they care about is taking their idea and making it real and showing it to their family and their friends. And so enabling that with the help of a tool like Lovable, Bolt, or GitHub Spark is amazing because it lets people that have no engineering background, take their idea and build software. And if we're thinking about, many of you have your MacBooks in your hand and your iPhones, right? We have these computers all around us, and many people on this planet are only enabled to consume software on their computers. They can create files and YouTube videos and what have you, but they cannot create software, and vibe coding enables that. At the same time, any professional software company will still have to have real engineers. Doesn't mean you have to go to university, but it certainly means you have to understand the craft, and you have to evolve that craft. You have to constantly learn. There's always a new technology, and that I don't think is going to go away. If anything, it's going to be more important because, again, if AI is writing way more code than humans write, who's going to control the AI? Who's going to monitor it? Who's going to make sure that what goes online, gets deployed to production this afternoon, isn't creating an incident over the weekend where you either have a bug or an outage, or even worse, you're leaking customer data.
Yeah. I mean, we're speaking about code writing quite a lot, right? One of the questions I ask myself is, I mean, we see that everything is going that agentic direction. Code is an abstraction, right? You could say prompts are another abstraction, not as powerful as code. Do we need code in the future? I mean, for AI, it could probably also be very easy to write kind of assembler again, or I don't know what, right? So any perspective on that? So will code and as we know it at the moment, disappear at a certain point in time?
Code is the abstraction of the CPU or GPU in our computers, right? Every CPU by design has an instruction set, which is hex values, effectively describing the commands of that processor. And then programming language is abstracting that away because it's much easier to write something in pseudo English, right? If you look at most programming languages, if not all, the keywords are all English words, a subset of the English language. That will exist because it is the layer that deterministically describes what the computer does. Right? Even the models themselves have code, a model kernel that executes the model and the model inference and provides the API and so on. And then human language inherently is non-deterministic. You and I can both say the same sentence and mean different things.
Yeah.
And that's what you see when you use these vibe coding tools that you prompt it, or even with image generators. I think it's even more visual. You describe something, and every time you give the model the same prompt, it gives you a different image due to the diffusion model architecture. And so we are going to have both. We're going to have the human language, which is non-deterministic, but also creative in how we think and how we communicate. And we're going to have code and programming language that abstracts what the computer actually does. And we, as engineers, are going to jump between those two layers. And if we can, I think we're going to write more and more human language. And then you can easily see a future where a program is completely written in human language. If you have a model, a generator that then does the right thing. And in fact, when you're interacting with the voice command of your phone or your car, that already in a way works like that, right? You give it a command, and then the car executes that and whatever, disables seat heating. And my car, for example, 3 out of 4 times claims it cannot do that, like disable whatever steering wheel heating. And then the 4th time it does it. Which is funny, right? Because one time it claims it can't do that, and the next time it actually does it, which means at that point in time it understood my non-deterministic command, which wasn't actually that non-deterministic, but from its perspective it was, and generated the right code, quote unquote, the right control flow to disable the heating. And so I think those two layers will logically exist, but if we can, we'll move more and more to the human language layer, because that's how our companies, our teams operate.
Yeah. Now we spoke about agent. So if I think of GitHub's future, so we spoke about AI agents, right? Is GitHub kind of the future home or platform for all of these AI agents? I mean, we have multiple workflows processes already on the platform. So that's kind of the direction you're going.
GitHub, from our perspective, is the home of all developers, and that's what drives us every single day. And key here is all developers. Anywhere around the world, whoever wants to code should find a home in GitHub. And for the last 17 years, it has been the place where human developers collaborate with each other, right? That is what GitHub. What was the disruption that GitHub brought to the industry, which is this concept of social coding, that it's not only about the source code and version control, Git, and all these things. It's actually a place where humans collaborate with each other, give feedback, review code, and so on. Going forward, we are seeing a world where it's no longer just human-to-human collaboration, but it's human-agent collaboration.
Also agent-agent?
And agent-agent collaboration. And so these are different stages. There's already demos that we show where the SRE agent finds an exception on your production environment, and then uses that information to file a GitHub issue, at which point the coding agents picks up that issue together with source code to fix that exception, and then files a draft pull request, and then the human comes in to review the change. But you could also see, code review agent coming in and reviewing that code, and then a deployment agent deploying that code into, Canary environment, and for the human to try out if everything works correctly,
but
and a testing agent.
In the loop? Because the interesting question would be, I mean, it sounds like, let's say in 3-4 years, right? It's all running automatically, and then human may look at that or not, right? Because agents are pretty good.
The human will be in the loop because we inherently live in a zero trust environment. There's enough, both intentional attacks, nation state attacker, bad actors, and what have you. And there's security vulnerabilities, software issues, bugs, and those kind of things, where we have to have a human in our companies and our organizations review what the machine has done before it impacts our customers. And look, let's face it, would you sit here if I would be an AI or
I would.
well, you might do that for the novelty, but certainly I think the more you bring generated words into that, the less people will attend. In the same way that if you know that an email is written by AI, how likely is it that you're actually reading that email, right? Like the joke in some of the podcasts in recent weeks have been, if you, especially in English, the long dash is generated by AI a lot. And so if you see a text that has lots of these long dashes, the M dash, and it's generated by AI, are you actually going to read it? Are you going to go to a bookstore and buy a book that was completely generated by AI? Or are you going to say, well, if that's the case, maybe I just chat with ChatGPT and give it a couple of prompts of what I want to know and have it generate for me. Same for music, like your background music might be generated by AI, in the kitchen or in the waiting area. But the music you identify with, where you buy expensive concert tickets, or an old-fashioned long player, that certainly I think will be only the case if a human has generated this, and the artist and the brand, the artist's name, the brand ultimately will play a huge role going forward.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I just read somewhere that on Spotify, like an AI band is actually pretty successful. So people like it, but it's still generated by humans, right? At the end.
I mean, like one of my favorite sports is Formula One. And Formula One is as much about people driving fast cars as it is around the drama and the human interaction between the drivers. And I think, certainly there will be events like robot fighting leagues where you have robots fighting with each other. But overall, we as humans are longing for human contact, for human emotions, for human drama, if you will. Often the drama is, creating more clicks than the good news. And I don't think AI is going to replace that. If anything, AI is going to commoditize certain things so much that you're no longer going to do it. You're no longer going to read emails that are generated by AI because they have no inherent value.
Last question regarding GitHub. I mean, you spoke a lot about making that a place for developers. Is there kind of a North Star metric, so kind of the developer happiness score or something that you measure and that you kind of take as orientation for any prioritization and your multi-million backlog?
Our North Star metric, or we call it the winning aspiration, is to enable 1 billion developers on the platform. We announced 150 million developers in December of last year, 2024. That has gone up from 100 million a couple of years before that, and I think around 27 million or so in 2018 when Microsoft acquired GitHub. And we believe that actually is 1 billion developers is a goal that is worthwhile pursuing, not only for us as a corporation, that ultimately makes revenue and profit, but also for us as humanity. Just like, we take it for granted today that everybody learns reading and writing and math and sciences and whatnot. And also that, just because you had physics in school doesn't mean you became a physicist. And many of us don't, right? Because otherwise the world would be full of physicists.
Absolutely.
Doesn't mean that because you learn coding in school, you become a professional software developer. But at the same time, these devices and the software running on them plays such a big role in our lives that we should ask ourselves, why is not every kid here in Berlin in first grade already learning Boolean logic and maybe moving blocks with Scratch to learn control flows and those kind of things? And so that is for us the North Star metric is to enable 1 billion developers and have them have a GitHub account, have them contribute to open source, which is one of the few things on this planet where people from many different countries can agree on something and not put other things in between them. And where a lot of innovation is going to be created. And we actually believe that the majority of human innovation that's ahead of us is only going to be possible with software, which means it's only going to be possible with open source.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. That was very, very insightful. I would like to change into a bit of your personal sharings, if I'm allowed to. So I have a son, we talked about, I have a son, he's like turning 13 end of this year. And I told him, look, I'm going to talk to Thomas. And he's like, oh, interesting. And I asked him, okay, what would be a question that you would like to get answers? And then he actually said, he thought about it and he actually said, okay, Have you ever found yourself on the verge of giving up completely so that you have no clue what to do? And if so, what did you do at that moment? So what is your lesson learned out of that? Anything you can share? I mean, maybe the insurance company is not buying the floppy disks anymore. I don't know. But anything you can share?
That has stuck with you, huh?
Yeah.
I mean, look, I think, everyone in life had a moment where they wanted to give up and throw everything, away. And sometimes I have that moment, especially, in Berlin, there's lots of bridges. I walk over these bridges and I take my cell phone and throw it into the river. And so nobody can ping me anymore. And I can go back to a life where you're not always connected. Because as much as, I remember, buying my first iPhone in 2007, and how excited I was about that. But I think we also have forgotten that there was life without being connected, and where you're not constantly checking in messages and uploading photos and whatnot. So there were multiple moments. Certainly, after I sold my company to Microsoft in late 2014, and as part of that, we moved back then with a baby and a 2-year-old to Seattle and joined a big corporation. And when you come from I think we were 11, 12 people, a startup in Stuttgart, where you have a life, and I hope this resonates with many of you, where you're mostly focused on building, and maybe you have a customer meeting every now and then, or you have a team meeting once every 2 weeks. You join a big corporation where your whole day is all of meetings. And it's not only 1 day of the week, it's 5 days of the week. Yeah. And many of those are actually not in your control, as in the invite comes from somebody else and there's 25 people on it. So if you're like, I don't have time right now, they're like, well, but there's 24 other people. And back then in 2015, it was mostly in-person meetings in Redmond, where Microsoft headquarters is, which is part of the reason that we moved there. There were definitely moments, in my first year at Microsoft, where I was thinking about, do I just, quit now, and rage quit is the English term, or flip the table, and go back to startup life. And as in many acquisitions, I had 3 years of golden handcuffs, as in part of the deal money was held back, and that in many ways saved me and taught me some grit, resilience against what I considered bullshit. And also, I think I learned a lot about big company culture and how to be effective. Those folks that I think I have now a lot more respect for people that have stayed with the company for 20 or even 30 years, given how much a company like Microsoft or Mercedes or SAP have evolved over the 30 years, how much these folks have gone through good days and bad days, and learn how to navigate this. Somebody once told me the secret of success at Microsoft is how you get the whole company working for you, and they might not even realize it, that they're helping you to be successful.
Yeah, thanks a lot for sharing. We are coming to the end of that session, and question to you guys. If there's any question that you want to ask, okay.
You said 1 hour, right? Like we have 25 minutes left.
Yeah. So we can talk longer. That's not an issue.
Yeah. He wants to go to lunch.
Yeah, people are killing me if you don't bring lunch on the table. It's like Germany, right? But Rainer, maybe you start.
Yeah, hello, I'm Rainer. I'm one of the co-MDs of Stefan. You said earlier that you yourself, the whole company runs on GitHub.
Yeah.
But you also say that GitHub is the home of developers.
Yeah.
So why is that? Why is the use so heavily on the software engineering side and not in other functions? The logic of GitHub can be used in other functions, but it's minimal how much it is used in other functions. And I guess my question is, do you plan to again or still make a push for also tapping into other areas? If yes, how? If no, why?
That's a great question. I think what you're kind of like asking is, why am I not designing GitHub so it's actually intended to be used by somebody in HR, finance, or legal? I think the best answer I can give you is actually the one hopefully you're giving to your startup, which is focus, 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 right? And designing GitHub to be the universal tool and replacing something like Workday or replacing financial tools like SAP That certainly would be something that we could do, but I think that would get us off the path that makes our core audience, our developers, happy. And so we see GitHub being used by all hubbers more of a way of them learning about our customer or target audience, and obviously also about us sharing everything in a single place. We have a lot of conversations about, we have 3,000 people at GitHub now as part of a 200,000 person Microsoft. And so the biggest problem we have is information sharing and communication, especially as a remote first company with folks all around the world. But it's easy to forget that even the United States, from Hawaii to New York, is 6 different time zones. And so information sharing, finding things is as crucial for our sales team or customer success and support team as it is for engineers. And that's why we are having them all use GitHub, so they know what they're talking about, both in what we're working on internally, but also in what features we're shipping to customers. But I think it would be a distraction to try designing GitHub for somebody who's not a developer. And in fact, one of the 3 principles that we set ourselves when the Microsoft acquisition took place, one of the 3 integration principles was developers always come first in how we design the product, how we communicate. The blog posts should be written for developers and not for marketers. How we are designing our internal processes. And the other 2 were Microsoft accelerates GitHub, which is the reverse of what many acquisitions actually do, which is the buyer tries to find synergies from the seller and tries to accelerate itself. And we think that's the wrong approach. We think the buyer should actually think like an investor. And how can I accelerate the company I'm buying to keep them on their path? Because clearly that path was successful in hopefully most of the acquisitions, that you're buying something that is successful to make it even more successful. And then the last one was, what can we find as opportunities to accelerate Microsoft? And Copilot certainly has been one of these things.
Thank you.
Sorry. Nailed it. Hi, Thomas. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Samant from the data team. I wanted to ask you about a certain trend that I've observed in the past maybe 2 decades as a tech CEO yourself. I feel like there was a time where at the point where tech companies became big boy companies, they brought in business people to lead them. That happened with Google, that happened with Snowflake, that happened with Oracle, of course. Now we've seen a sort of shift towards, again, getting the tech people at the leads. I mean, Snowflake shifted to this. Microsoft went with Satya Nadella and stuff like Steve Ballmer, Snowflake as well. You're also a tech person yourself. So I'm wondering, what, in your opinion, makes for a great tech CEO? And why is it different from different kinds of companies who don't have this engineering focus as much ingrained in their DNA?
That's, I'm sure there's different reasons, across different companies, but I would say from what I've experienced, what has changed between 20 years ago and now is that the role of the developer in those companies has, and the power that developers have in these companies has significantly grown. And the Twilio CEO or founder once wrote a book, Ask Your Developers. And in fact, when you take an Uber from San Francisco airport into a city, I think one of the billboards still says that, ask your developers, because in many companies no longer the financial, the procurement department or the business folks deciding which tools to use and what the roadmap is. It's the software developers and the software development and discipline, right? Like program managers, product managers, TPMs, designers. And so as most companies ultimately have become software companies, like a bank today is a software company, whether they're building trading platforms, whether they're building consumer software, like would you open a bank account if there's no good mobile app? Probably not, right? Like, and soon enough, by the way, we will live in a world where you're also going to ask the bank, if you're not integrating into ChatGPT, I'm not going to open an account. And in China, that's already the case with WeChat. We're heading into that place where you're expecting the products and the services that you're using in your life to integrate with your agent and not the other way around, where they're forcing you to go to their webpage. So software has become such a large role in many companies, and I used bank as an example. It's the same for the trash company in Berlin and the public transport and the local government and the federal government. All of those are spending a huge part of their budget on software, and that means having the C-suite have experience with software development and technology and actually know how to run a software company has become much more important than the business skills. And some companies like Apple, Tim Cook is an operations guy, right? Like there's the counterexample for everything. And so from Steve Jobs, who was the product engineering person, to Tim, who's the operations person, he has hired, each of them have hired, the respective other folks as their, left and right hand leaders to support them in the things they're not good at. And I think that actually is the most important leadership skill these days in tech companies, which is like, what you're good at. And then you hire people that complement you within the leadership team to be successful as a company. But I think actually it's amazing. And, in recent weeks, we have seen Meta hiring AI folks, not everybody, right? Like it's like, one, yeah. It's like a double digit, some maybe triple digit in a world of millions of developers and researchers. But they've hired AI researchers in something that we have previously only seen in the NBA and Formula One, right? Like they're effectively treated like superstars. And if you believe social media, some of them even had some form of agent advising them of how to negotiate their contract. I think that's amazing. I think that's actually, where this world is going, which is the people that are able to write these complex software systems are treated like, superstars, whether that's in movies and in sports and other disciplines, because like they're ultimately delivering as much, if not more, to society than those people.
Maybe a follow-up question if you have time. As you mentioned this earlier in the beginning about like the education of people, that we obviously should focus more on getting coding to everybody. Do you then foresee maybe another bold prediction that in the next 5 to 10 years where maybe old school CEOs who do not have that amount of experience, touch points with software, with engineering as much, they just become obsolete? Because as you mentioned, all companies are to a certain degree tech companies now.
CEOs become obsolete if they're not constantly evolving, if they're not adapting to the world around them, right? Like that's always been true. And nowadays it means you have to learn technology. And in 2025, it means you have to rethink how, as a CEO, you adapt AI, within your day-to-day, within your office. How can, your chief of staff, your assistant, your business managers use AI to run, that office more efficiently? Because if you're not leading by example, your engineers and your product managers are not going to adopt AI either, and certainly not your HR and finance folks. So I think it has always been part of being a successful leader to be adaptive, to figure out how to solve problems in new ways to gain a competitive advantage. So I think that doesn't mean that somebody with a non-technical background in 20 years will be obsolete, but they're going to be obsolete if they're not learning about the new way of doing things in the next 2 years, honestly. I think 20 years is so far away. Yeah. Like think about what, life was like 20 years ago, or 2005. Like we were happy if there was Wi-Fi, somewhere in a coffee shop. Like I went to university here in Berlin from 98 to 2002. Nobody had a laptop, to my memory. I had an HP iPad, like a Windows CE device that I had to sync at home with my calendar. It was more like a toy than anything real. There was no Wi-Fi in university, and you were happy about having landline internet access instead of paying AOL and CompuServe, right? That's only 22, 23 years ago. And we had a Siemens or Nokia phone that was good at playing games and sending very expensive text messages. But certainly you wouldn't have your boarding pass on it, or get reminders to put out the trash cans, right? Like that's the world we live in right now, and it's normal, for the kids that grow up now. In fact, I saw a study last night somewhere that junior developers are adopting AI faster than senior developers. And I think that's, the same you're seeing with kids adopting new media like TikTok and YouTube much faster and in a very different viewing pattern than, old people like us. That are still used to or grew up with linear TV and where you go on YouTube or Netflix to watch a show instead of watching a creator, playing Minecraft while you're also playing Minecraft, and you have a FaceTime call with your friends running at the same time. I'm like, how can you listen to all these things? And I'm like, Daddy, that's easy. Like, and then they have like an audiobook on the AirPods. Right? Like that's the new world. And I think we are going to see a rapid change of that, because kids that grow up now, they're so used to being always connected to using AI, to using technology, that we are going to struggle with keeping up with them.
Change is good, Thomas. Thank you.
You mentioned change, and you mentioned that the development of CEOs, and I think for all of us, if you look back, I mean, you were CPO for a couple of months and now CEO. I mean, we learn from mistakes. Is there anything we say, okay, that was a huge learning caused by whatever mistake?
Every mistake is some form of learning. Maybe, sometimes the learning is more that you get over it and move on. My team that is with me at these trips where we go to conferences, like I often think more about, the stumbles I had on stage, or where I said the wrong word first and then corrected myself, or used the wrong English pronunciation. I have that in my head way longer than anyone watching my keynote or presentation. And so sometimes it's good to just get over your mistakes and move on, and realizing that the channels are so flooded that nobody remembers any of that stuff. I think as a leader, I think about my mistakes in 3 categories. One are the ones where the personal relationships are impacted by this. Emotions were involved, or we were not happy with each other. And I think often those are the most impactful, that we have a hard time of moving on from. In the middle bucket is the customer. You disappointed a customer, and I have many stories where, especially in my early days, where we had promised a feature to the customer and then couldn't deliver. And it's bad to tell them it's 3 months late, which, if you're building software, that's somewhat normal. It's even worse when you tell them we killed that feature and we're never going to deliver to that, and then delivering an apology ultimately. And I think most customer relationships are able to move on from that because our customers are building software themselves. But that's certainly not the meeting you're looking forward to, and where the mistake has a repercussion that is maybe as little as delivering an apology and promising that going forward you're going to provide more transparency, to the worst case scenario, which is you're losing the deal. And as such, the customer goes with a competitor. And then the third one are the ones I think we often think about in these fireside chats, which is strategic mistakes, right? Like you set up yourself on a strategy for the company, for the product, for the next year, and you realize that was the wrong strategy. And there, I think they feel like the worst, but they're actually the least important of all of these, because nobody is perfect. Nobody can predict the future. Like almost every startup has made a pivot at some point in time, and whether you look at GitHub in the last 3 years when I was the CEO, or the 7 years that I've been with GitHub, or the 18 years or 18 and a half years the company has been around, 17 and a half years, we have made a lot of mistakes. We have started a lot of projects that went nowhere. GitHub at some point had a jobs page where we could post engineering jobs and find engineering jobs. Was a great idea, but not a great business, and ultimately not. And it goes back to your question within our focus area. In my time, we started a project to deploy single tenant instances of GitHub Enterprise for individual customers. With data residency, you could pick, a region and deploy this. It wouldn't scale and wouldn't have 0 downtime upgrades. And so every time, that customer instance needed an upgrade, we need to take it down. No customer likes that. And so we had to make a strategy change there and shift direction. And that was painful in that moment in time. And since last September, now we have proper data residency and has all the same features as GitHub.com, and it deploys, at an equal speed. So that strategic mistake that at the time was painful was easily corrected. And I feel like, those strategy mistakes are often easier to get over than the personal relationships that, some of them never get fixed. Yeah. And you move on in life with grief and what have you, but like you're regretting some of the things you said or some of the conversations you had.
Thanks for sharing. We have time for 2 more questions. So I saw a couple of hands. Michael?
Hi, I'm Michael from the software engineering team. A bit of a product question in the direction of generative AI. So you mentioned a few times deterministic versus non-deterministic, and I think that's an interesting variable in the world of generative AI. So in, let's say, more traditional software products, we can kind of define correctness, right? So we can say in e-commerce, you should be able to check out and buy, right? Or you should be able to load this dashboard and see it. But when the core or even a big part of the product itself is non-deterministic, I think that changes. So, and GitHub has, for example, one of the largest LLM-based products in the market, right? So if you talk about GitHub Copilot, I wonder how then you evaluate the quality of that product or the success of it, because you can't just say, you know, X people bought or something like that, right? It's very non-deterministic. Whether you've created any strategy around evaluating the success of such a product.
Correctness of software is a pipe dream, right? Like that doesn't actually exist. There's research papers on this, and there's certainly algorithms where you can prove correctness. But as soon as you get to a certain scale, the calculation of that correctness is so expensive. And you know, we've yet to have AI proof that P equals NP. If you had the theoretical foundations of, was, by the way, I hated that at Technical University Berlin. But the way we prove correctness of software today is that we have humans in the loop. That's effectively what code review is about. We have processes like you know, unit testing, debugging, profilers. We have hopefully CI/CD, and you deploy anything or merge anything without having all your CI/CD processes being green. And even then, you still deploy bugs all the time, right? Like find a software product today that actually is quote unquote perfect or correct. That doesn't exist. And even if that exists, then next week you still introduce a regression, a new bug, and so on. And so the answer is humans. And the answer is DevOps processes, and ultimately, you know, having a healthy company culture where the team and the people in your team are setting high standards, and just because you can vibe code it this afternoon doesn't mean they actually accept that shit and merge it into the main branch, right? And if they do, that's a great, you know, mistake to learn from next week when they're like, oh, you know, Michael, you know, delivered poor quality, and you're like, yep, you know, I'm accountable, you know, I take responsibility, which, by the way, is the other thing about mistakes, right? Like I hope, you know, the generation of kids that grow up today have a different mindset on these things. Like when they come home from school with a C or a 3 here in German school system, that they don't see that as in, I'm dumb and I don't know how to learn, but as in, this is great because the teacher gave me the template of all the mistakes I made, and I'm going to fix all these mistakes going forward, right? And that's where AI is going to be really great, because you don't have to wait for your coworker in Seattle or San Francisco to wake up, because by now it's like 5 in the morning and they're still asleep, or 4 in the morning. But you can have Copilot review that code for you and already give you, you know, half the mistakes back. And so you can grow your confidence level that when those folks wake up, you can like, well, this should be close to good enough to pass code review. And I think many people joining software teams, small or large, have that anxiety in their head. What is that person that just hired me thinking about me? And I often, you know, talk about that, which is like, you know, I join your company today. Like I have to ask 1,000 questions, because like no matter how much experience I have, you have institutional knowledge, you have processes, you have designed, you know, your company in a certain way. And I can only find out about this by either reading wikis or by asking you questions. But the human nature pulls me away from that, because the more dumb questions I ask you, not because you think I'm dumb, but because I think this is a dumb question, the more I grow an anxiety in my head of what are you going to think about me? And I'm going to get to the point where you're like, why on earth did we hire Thomas in the first place, right? So having AI, you know, trained on your company knowledge, you know, grounded on all the data is actually perfect, because whether it's kids or whether it's grown-ups, we have a much easier time to ask the computer something, and also the computer has infinite patience and infinite amount of time than asking our coworkers, right? So I think that's where we're going to have much better code, much higher quality code, but we're going to have the human in the loop to make sure that that is actually the case.
Yeah, the potential for more feedback loops.
Yeah. Last one.
All right, last one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other question? I'm not really sure. So you have to do Schnick, Schnack, Schnuck. Who's going first? Okay, no, I didn't.
I was just wondering, when you were describing your day-to-day, with the Slack prioritization. Why is that not handled by an AI agent yet?
Because the humans asking me questions don't want the AI to respond, right? Otherwise, they couldn't ask Slack AI.
Part.
But look, often the messages that leaders like me and my leadership team get are problems that the hubbers cannot solve themselves, right? That I think Obama once said that is that the problems that make it to his desk are the worst ones, because otherwise his team would have always solved them for him, right? Like the person on the top of a hierarchy gets the worst problems in the company or in the organization because the people below that person, all the way to the individual contributor, inherently want to solve problems themselves and not escalate them to the leadership chain. And so what makes it to me in Slack, the decisions I need to make, or the questions that land with me, or are you willing to meet at 6 in the morning with the customer to talk them through an escalation? That's not something AI can solve. And again, I think we are not anywhere near a world where customers will just accept we're sending AI Thomas to talk with you. If anything, that's probably so disrespectful that destroys the relationship much more than that AI Thomas can help them with their questions. Now, that doesn't mean there's going to be not AI support agents. Those obviously already exist, and sometimes as users, we're actually happy about using them because it's faster than talking with a human. Or the other example I always have in my head is like, who do you trust more, the human taxi driver or the self-driving car? And if you're a parent, you're probably already erring on the side of the self-driving car more than on the human driver, because you trust the human actually less than the car that doesn't have a human in it, and where some software company built the algorithm to drive the car through San Francisco or London. I don't think they have that in Berlin yet. But that's actually the decisions where we are going to have very interesting future ahead of us, where sometimes we prefer AI over humans, and many times we're going to prefer humans making decisions with us than AI.
Thank you.
That was close. So thanks a lot, Thomas.
That was the game, right?
Yeah.
Can you hit
we try to hit it, absolutely.
Cup,
so far we managed to be very good. Thanks a lot, Thomas, for all the time, all of the questions being answered. It was a pleasure. Hope to see you again. And thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. So feel invited for company lunch. The people look hungry already. So we'll switch over to that. And for the people online, stay tuned. And
we can probably stay like 10 minutes or so, but then I got to leave.
We have enough time. So we're here.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So, thank you.